At 35,000 feet, first class is supposed to be a sanctuary, soft light, quiet service, a sky-wide hush. Then a stranger decides who belongs and who does not. A black woman sits by the window, calm as the clouds. A white passenger across the aisle smirks, whispers, and pushes. Words sharpen. Glances turn into a spectacle. But what happens when entitlement collides with a strength that does not raise its voice? What if the person you try to belittle is the reason these wings lift at all? How far will arrogance go when faced with a single sentence spoken with absolute composure? In a cabin built for comfort, who will define the standard? The loudest voice or the quietest authority? Tonight, witness a room tilt, a line drawn, and a truth revealed, not with fury, but with steady power that changes more than a flight. It changes the rules. If you believe respect is not optional, hit like, share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you never miss our next chapter. Ready to board? Let us begin. At Los Angeles International Airport, in a corner of the Aurora Air First Class Lounge, the world seemed to move at a slower, more deliberate pace. The floor-to-ceiling windows framed a panoramic view of the runway, where long-shadowed aircraft glided in and out like giant birds in a ballet. Sunlight spilled across polished walnut tables and plush cream leather chairs. There was a faint scent of bergamot and fresh linen in the air. Soft piano music drifted from somewhere unseen, the kind that made people lower their voices without realizing it. Dr. Mariah Ellison sat near the far end of the lounge, close enough to see the distant Pacific shimmer in the morning haze. She wore a tailored ivory pantsuit that fit her athletic frame with understated elegance. No heavy jewelry, no loud patterns, just a thin gold bracelet on her left wrist and a pair of small pearl studs that caught the light when she moved. In front of her, a slim leather notebook lay open next to a half-finished cup of green tea. The pages were filled with neat handwriting and diagrams, thoughts she often jotted down between meetings and flights. Her trip to London was partly business, partly something she allowed herself to call a break. The first 2 days would be a final review of Aurora Air's Heathrow operations. Then she planned to disappear to the English countryside with a few old friends. For now, she was enjoying the rarest of commodities in her life stillness. A moment where the only sound was the soft scrape of a pen and the distant hum of ground crews at work. The hush broke without warning. The lounge doors slid open, and a sharp rhythm of heels echoed across the marble floor. A woman's voice followed, a few decibels too loud for the space. "Charles, do keep up," the voice commanded, every syllable polished but edged. "We are not wandering through a bus station." Mariah glanced up just long enough to take in the scene. The woman was impeccably dressed in a fitted scarlet jacket, diamond brooch pinned precisely at the collar. Her blonde hair was swept into a rigid chignon, not a strand out of place. A Stratagem logo tote bag hung from one arm, the other wrist stacked with gold bangles that clinked as she moved. Behind her trailed a man in a navy blazer, his shoulders slightly hunched as if pulled along by an invisible rope. Vivian Rockwell. Even without knowing her name yet, Mariah could read the type in an instant. Wealth was not simply a circumstance for this woman. It was a performance. Charles Rockwell, the weary man in her wake, kept his eyes on the floor tiles, nodding vaguely at whatever she was saying. Vivian's gaze began its silent inventory of the room. She looked at people the way a jeweler examines stones searching for flaws. Her eyes paused on a businessman frowning into his laptop, slid past a young couple sipping champagne, then halted when they found Mariah. It was not the kind of stare meant to connect. It was an appraisal, then an instant dismissal, a message that Mariah had been weighed, measured, and found wanting. The corner of Vivian's mouth twitched as she turned to her husband. "Anyone can get in here now, it seems," she murmured, not so quietly that the words failed to travel. Charles made a low sound that might have been agreement, might have been discomfort. His gaze flicked toward the buffet, away from his wife's sharpness. Mariah returned her attention to the tarmac, her expression unchanged. This was not the first time she had been mistaken for someone out of place in a room she had personally paid to design. Literally paid. In this case, she had approved every texture, every menu, every seating layout of Aurora's flagship lounges. She wrote another line in her notebook. People like this, she had long ago decided, were inevitable in public life, a predictable but irritating variable. The challenge was deciding when and whether they warranted her energy. Across the lounge, Vivian chose a pair of chairs opposite Mariah, arranging herself like a queen settling on a throne. Her handbag occupied its own seat. Charles lowered himself into the other, already reaching for his phone. Vivian ordered a cappuccino from the passing attendant with the air of someone granting an audience. She took her first sip, eyes never leaving Mariah for long. It was the sort of sustained attention you could feel without seeing. The boarding announcement came a few minutes later. Aurora Air Flight 007 to London Heathrow is now boarding first class. Mariah closed her notebook, slipped it into her tote, and rose. She moved with the same deliberate grace she used in boardrooms, the kind that said nothing needed to be rushed. Vivian and Charles were on their feet almost instantly, Vivian's heels clicking in brisk staccato as she made a beeline for the gate. The walk to the jet bridge was short, lined with framed photographs of Aurora Air's history early prop planes, smiling crews from the 1960s, the unveiling of the first A350. Vivian's voice carried in the narrow corridor. "Credit card points," she said, with a soft laugh that was meant to sound private, but wasn't. "I swear that's how half these people get in." Charles muttered something under his breath. Mariah kept her gaze forward, the hum of the aircraft systems growing louder as they approached the open door. Naomi Morales, the lead flight attendant, stood at the threshold. Her navy uniform was immaculate, her dark hair neatly pinned back, and her smile warm. "Dr. Ellison," Naomi greeted, her tone respectful. "Familiar. It's good to have you with us again. Your seat is 2A. May I bring you your usual green tea once you're settled?" Mariah returned the smile. "That would be perfect. Thank you, Naomi." The exchange lasted less than 10 seconds, but it was long enough for Vivian Rockwell to glance over her shoulder. Her eyes narrowed in the faintest frown. Inside the aircraft, the first-class cabin was a world apart from the bustle behind the curtain. Only 12 suites lined in warm oak and champagne leather. Each was its own private cocoon, complete with a lie-flat bed, personal wardrobe, and a small lamp that cast a golden circle on the console. Mariah slid into 2A by the window, placing her tote in the side compartment. Across the aisle, Vivian and Charles took seats 2D and 2G. Vivian stored her bag with exaggerated care, her rings catching the light as she did. Mariah fastened her belt, looking out at the runway where another plane lifted into the sky. She could already feel the tension in the air, like static before a storm. Vivian leaned slightly toward her husband, speaking in a tone just loud enough to drift across the aisle. "It must be thrilling for her," she said. "Imagine first time up here." Mariah didn't look over. Not yet, but she heard every word. Mariah kept her gaze on the window, watching the sun glint off the wingtips of a taxiing aircraft. She had long ago learned the value of selective attention, deciding which provocations deserved a response and which dissolved into silence. The remark from across the aisle fell into the latter category. For now, Naomi returned with a tray, setting a delicate porcelain cup of green tea on Mariah's console. The scent rose like a small exhale of calm. "Let me know if there's anything else before takeoff," Naomi said softly. "Thank you," Mariah replied, her tone warm, genuine. Vivian's head tilted ever so slightly at the exchange, as if a puzzle piece had landed in her lap but refused to fit. She busied herself adjusting her seat, then leaned toward Charles again. "You'd think there'd be more screening," she murmured. "First class used to mean something." Charles gave a non-committal grunt, his eyes on the in-flight magazine. It was clear he'd perfected the art of disengaging from his wife's running commentary, though not enough to stop her. The last of the first-class passengers boarded, a young man with wire-frame glasses sliding into 3A. He glanced around with quiet curiosity, his gaze settling briefly on Mariah before pulling out a small notebook. Ethan Park. Mariah recognized the type observant, watchful, the sort who notices undercurrents others miss. The cabin crew moved with quiet efficiency, stowing bags, offering menus. Naomi stopped by the Rockwells. "Would you like champagne before takeoff?" she asked with a practiced smile. Vivian brightened. "Of course. The same you're serving." "Her." Naomi's smile didn't falter. "We have a 2010 vintage Dom Perignon for pre-departure today." "That will be fine," Vivian said, but her eyes lingered on Mariah for a beat too long. It was the kind of look meant to be seen. Mariah sipped her tea. She was aware of the scrutiny, aware of the subtle signals being broadcast across the aisle, and though her posture remained composed, there was a quiet weight building in her chest. She could feel the old reflex, the urge to assert her place, to meet ignorance with cold clarity. But another voice in her head urged patience. Let her show herself fully. It whispered, "Give her the rope she's already pulling." The aircraft doors closed. Safety announcements began. Naomi collected the champagne flutes as the engines powered up with a steady, resonant hum. As the jet inched back from the gate, Vivian leaned again toward Charles, though her words were clearly meant to travel. "I wonder how they decide who gets these special touches," she said. Her tone sweetened with mock curiosity. "Some of us pay full fare." Mariah's eyes flicked toward her, just briefly. Vivian met the glance with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The seatbelt sign chimed on. The cabin settled into the muffled quiet of takeoff preparations. Outside, the runway stretched ahead, heat shimmering above its surface. Mariah placed her cup down, clasping her hands loosely in her lap. As the plane accelerated, she felt the familiar weight press into her back. The ground blurred, then fell away. Los Angeles shrinking beneath a patchwork of rooftops and freeways. The climb smoothed out, the engines leveled into a soft roar. The seatbelt sign remained on, but Vivian was already shifting in her seat. Her body angled toward Naomi as the attendant passed. "I have a small concern," Vivian began, her voice pitched to Carrie without seeming to. She flicked her eyes toward Mariah, then back to Naomi. "I don't mean to cause trouble, but I've noticed some passengers receiving unusual attention." Naomi's expression didn't change, but her hands paused briefly on the edge of the service cart. "All our first-class passengers receive personalized service. Mrs. Rockwell." "Yes, but this feels different." Vivian pressed. "Knowing someone's name, specific drinks, special meals, it does make one wonder." Mariah's jaw tightened. She kept her gaze on the clouds outside, but her ears caught every syllable. Naomi's reply was even. "Doctor, Ellison is one of our most valued passengers. We pride ourselves on knowing our frequent guests. Vivian gave a small laugh. Doctor, is it what kind of doctor? I wonder. No offense, but I've been flying first class for 30 years and I've never seen quite this level of familiarity. It just changes the atmosphere. Don't you think? Across the aisle. Ethan glanced up from his notebook, his eyes darting between the women. Something in the air had shifted. The passengers in 1A and 1D were no longer reading. Their attention was subtly angled toward the conversation. Mariah turned her head slightly, meeting Vivian's gaze for the first time since boarding. Her expression was neutral, her voice calm. It's a comfortable way to travel, she said. Vivian's smile thinned. I'm sure it is. I just hope you're not too overwhelmed. The cutlery is on the left. Charles shifted in his seat. Vivian, he muttered, let it go. But Vivian wasn't interested in letting go. She leaned back, satisfied she'd scored some invisible point, and reached for her champagne as Naomi placed the glass down. Mariah faced the window again, her mind quiet on the surface, but moving beneath. This wasn't new. Variations of this scene had played out countless times in her life at universities, in corporate boardrooms, even at charity galas, where she was the largest donor in the room. The assumption that she was an exception, a visitor, never the owner of the space she occupied. Most days, and she could let it pass. But sometimes, the moment came when silence became complicity. She wasn't sure yet if this was that moment, but the line was drawing itself. Naomi passed again with the menu. Dr. Ellison, the chef has prepared the sea bass with saffron risotto you requested. Mariah nodded. Thank you. Naomi, that will be perfect. Vivian's head swiveled. Special orders too. My. Naomi moved on without comment. Mariah inhaled slowly, exhaled even slower. Patience, she reminded herself, but the patience was no longer effortless. It had weight now, pressing against her ribs. The captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing their cruising altitude, weather over the Atlantic, expected arrival time. As the words faded, Vivian leaned toward Naomi again. I'd like to know what credentials are required for this special status, she said lightly. Some of us pay for this experience. We expect a certain caliber of fellow passenger. Mariah turned from the window, her eyes settling on Vivian with steady focus. Her voice, when she spoke, was quiet, but edged with authority. Mrs. Rockwell, I've said nothing to you. I've done nothing to interfere with your flight, yet you seem fixated on my presence. I'm asking you, once, to stop. The air seemed to hold its breath. Vivian's smile faltered for the first time, but only for a moment. How dare you speak to me like that, she said, voice rising. I feel threatened. Mariah's hands rested calmly on her lap. Inside, a decision was being made. She looked past Vivian to Naomi. Please go to the flight deck, Mariah said evenly. Tell Captain Kane the owner is on board, and tell him we have a passenger disturbance in first class. The words fell like a stone into still water. The ripples reached every seat. Naomi blinked, processing what she had just heard. The owner. Passenger disturbance. These were not words thrown around lightly in first class. Her eyes darted to Mariah's, searching for any sign that this was a misunderstanding. But what she saw there was certainty, calm and unshakable. Yes, Dr. Ellison, Naomi said quietly. Her professional smile slipped into something more serious as she turned toward the cockpit. Vivian let out a disbelieving laugh. Owner of this airline, please. I have been a member of Aurora's Diamond Tier for 2 decades. I know who runs this company, and it is not you." Mariah didn't answer. She simply folded her hands in her lap, gaze fixed ahead. Silence had always been one of her sharpest tools. The absence of a retort unnerved Vivian more than any argument could. Charles shifted uncomfortably, glancing at his wife. "Vivian, maybe we don't start," she snapped. "This is about standards. I am simply ensuring we maintain them." From 3A, Ethan Park watched with careful stillness. His phone was face down on the armrest, but his fingers tapped the record function without lifting it. Years of journalism classes had taught him that the first seconds of a confrontation could be the most telling. The cockpit door opened, and Captain Robert Kane stepped into the cabin. His presence seemed to change the air pressure. Tall, broad-shouldered, with silver at his temples and eyes that missed nothing. He carried himself like a man used to making decisions with lives on the line. He walked straight to Mariah. "Dr. Ellison," he said, inclining his head. "Naomi briefed me. I understand there's been a disturbance." "Yes, Captain," Mariah replied. Her tone was polite, measured. "Mrs. Rockwell has repeatedly questioned my right to be here, involved the crew unnecessarily, and escalated to claiming she feels threatened. I would like this resolved." Vivian stood, her hands on her hips. "Captain, this is absurd. I simply asked some questions. She's overreacting." Kane's gaze shifted to her, and something in his expression made Vivian falter. "Mrs. Rockwell, I was informed you were creating a hostile environment for both crew and passengers, and refusing to comply with crew instructions. That is not acceptable." "You don't understand," Vivian insisted, her voice rising. "This woman is pretending to be someone she's not. I know people at corporate. I will have this checked." Mariah finally turned her full attention on Vivian. "Pretending my name is Dr. Mariah Ellison. I am the majority owner and chief executive of Aurora Air. I led the acquisition that saved this airline from bankruptcy 3 years ago. The in-flight systems you're about to use run on software developed by my first company. I designed this cabin layout. So, Mrs. Rockwell, you can stop wondering if I belong here. This space exists because of me." The words were spoken without a trace of boastfulness, just a statement of fact. They landed heavily in the quiet cabin. Even the hum of the engine seemed to fade for a moment. Vivian's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. "That's ridiculous. You're making this up." "I have nothing to prove to you," Mariah said simply. Captain Kane straightened. "Dr. Ellison, per company policy, you have the right to request removal of any passenger who creates a safety or comfort concern. Do you wish to exercise that right?" Mariah's eyes stayed on Vivian. "Yes. I've asked her to stop." "She refused." The captain nodded once. "Understood." Charles leaned forward, his voice low and urgent. "Captain, please." "She didn't mean this isn't negotiable," Kane interrupted. "Safety and compliance are not optional in my cabin." Vivian's voice took on a brittle edge. "You can't just throw me off." "Do you know who my husband is?" "Yes," Mariah said before the captain could answer. "Charles Rockwell, Senior Vice President at Stratagem Realty Group." Charles froze. He hadn't said a word about his position on this flight, but hearing it spoken aloud made his stomach drop. Mariah's gaze on him was unreadable, but there was something in it, a filing away of information, a silent calculation. Vivian stepped closer to the aisle. "We are important clients. We've invested in properties tied to this airline's hubs. This will have consequences." Mariah's voice was calm. "Actions always do." Captain Kane gave a subtle hand signal to Naomi. Notify ground control. We're returning to the gate." The words rippled through the cabin. A murmur passed between the passengers in row 1. Ethan glanced down at his phone screen, the red recording light still steady. Vivian seemed stunned into stillness for a moment. Then she snapped back, her voice sharp. "This is an outrage. I will sue this airline, and you personally. You're free to pursue whatever legal action you think is warranted," Mariah said. "But right now, you will be leaving this plane." The aircraft began its slow turn back toward the terminal. The engines rumbled in a deeper tone, a sound that meant the journey had been paused before it truly began. Charles rubbed his forehead. "Vivian, please, let's just go." But she wasn't ready to let it go. "You'll regret this," she hissed toward Mariah. Mariah didn't respond. She picked up her cup of green tea, took a slow sip, and looked back out at the tarmac. Her heartbeat was steady. She had long since stopped letting people like Vivian rattle her. The jet bridge reconnected. 2 uniformed Port Authority officers stepped inside. Captain Kane addressed them quietly, then gestured toward the Rockwells. "Mrs. Rockwell, Mr. Rockwell, please gather your belongings," one officer said. Vivian's face flushed deep crimson. She yanked her tote bag from the overhead compartment, her bangles jangling with emotion. Charles moved more slowly, his expression hollow. As they stepped into the aisle, Vivian turned one last time toward Mariah. "This isn't over." Mariah's voice was soft but clear. "It is for this flight." The officers led them toward the door. Passengers in rows 3 and 4 watched openly now. Ethan's phone caught every second. When the cabin door closed again, a hush settled over first class. Naomi returned to Mariah's side. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," she said quietly. "You have nothing to apologize for," Mariah replied. "You handled it professionally." Captain Kane stopped by her seat before returning to the cockpit. "We'll be underway again shortly. Dr. Ellison, thank you for your patience." Mariah inclined her head. "Thank you, Captain." As the plane pushed back a second time, Mariah settled into her seat. The green tea was still warm. Outside, the runway waited. Inside, a dozen people were now very aware that they had witnessed something unusual, a quiet exercise of authority that had shifted the balance in the room completely. Mariah closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in the calm. The confrontation was over. But the story was only beginning. The aircraft climbed smoothly over the California coastline, the morning sun throwing a trail of gold across the Pacific. In the first-class cabin, conversation had dropped to a whisper. It was the kind of quiet that follows an unexpected storm, when people are still deciding how to talk about what they have just seen. Mariah kept her gaze on the clouds beyond the window. Outwardly she was calm, but inside she could feel the echo of the encounter still humming through her. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by something heavier, not regret, but a familiar ache. Confrontations like that never came without cost. Even when you won. Naomi returned with a fresh pot of green tea, placing it gently on the console beside her. "We'll be serving lunch in a little over an hour. Dr. Ellison, if there's anything else you need, just let me know." Mariah gave her a warm smile. "Thank you, Naomi, and thank you for handling everything as you did." Naomi's eyes softened. "I just wish it hadn't been necessary." "It often is," Mariah replied, her voice low, "but necessary doesn't make it pleasant." Naomi gave a small nod and moved on, tending to the other passengers. A few glanced at Mariah with something like newfound respect. Others simply avoided her eyes. She understood. People often didn't know how to react when they saw power revealed unexpectedly. From across the aisle, the now empty seats of 2D and 2G sat like a ghostly reminder of what had just happened. The cabin crew had already removed the Rockwell's champagne glasses, folded the blankets back into crisp rectangles, and left the armrests upright. The absence was almost louder than their presence had been. In 3A. Ethan Park shifted slightly, leaning forward just enough to catch Mariah's attention. "Dr. Ellison," he said quietly, "I hope you don't mind me saying that was something to watch." Mariah regarded him for a moment. He was young, early 20s at most, but there was a seriousness in his eyes. It wasn't meant to be a performance. She said, "I know," Ethan replied quickly. "I just mean, I've never seen someone handle that kind of thing without raising their voice. You didn't have to." She knew. Mariah tilted her head. "And you were recording." He hesitated, then nodded. I'm a journalism student at UCLA. I don't post trash, if that's what you're worried about, but I think people should see what happened." Her lips curved in the faintest smile. "Just be sure they see the whole story, not just the drama." "That's the plan," Ethan said, and leaned back again, almost shyly. Mariah returned to her tea, though her mind was now moving in two directions. One part replayed the conversation with Vivian, the escalation, the choice to call Captain Kane. The other part was already considering the broader implications. Vivian had named her husband's company with such confidence, as if that were a shield. Mariah knew better. In business, a name could be an opening as much as a defense. Lunch service began. The scent of warm bread and saffron risotto filled the cabin. Mariah accepted her plate with a quiet thank you. She ate slowly, letting the flavors anchor her in the present. Halfway through the meal, Captain Kane's voice came over the intercom, smooth and professional. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are cruising at 36,000 feet. We expect favorable winds across the Atlantic and an on-time arrival at Heathrow. On behalf of the crew, thank you for your patience earlier." The acknowledgement was subtle, but in first class. Subtle carried weight. A few passengers glanced at Mariah again, as if reminded of the reason for that thanks. When Naomi cleared her plate, Mariah asked for a cup of chamomile. As she waited, she let her eyes wander over the cabin. The space was exactly as she had envisioned when she redesigned it 2 years earlier. Intimate, warm, efficient. She'd chosen the fabrics herself, insisted on the curve of the privacy partitions, approved the menu down to the selection of teas. And still, there were people like Vivian who would look at her and assume she had arrived here by accident or indulgence. Her thoughts slipped back to her early career. The first time she'd been invited to present at an aerospace technology conference. She'd been the only black woman in a room of 300 executives, and one had asked her, in front of everyone, if she was there to take minutes. She'd smiled then, too, and answered, "Only if you want the minutes to include the patent application I'm filing against your company." That memory steadied her now. Naomi returned with the chamomile. "Here you go. And Dr. Ellison, if I may, I've been with Aurora for 7 years. I've never felt prouder to work here than I did today." Mariah accepted the cup, her eyes meeting Naomi's. That means more than you know. The rest of the cabin settled into the rhythm of a long flight. Lights dimmed slightly. Passengers reclined their seats, and the white noise of the engines became a kind of lullaby. But Mariah's mind was not ready for rest. She took out her tablet, connected to the in-flight Wi-Fi, and opened a secure messaging app. To Julian Mercer, subject passenger incident, follow-up. Summary 2. Passengers removed from Flight 007 for repeated harassment and disruption. Names Vivian and Charles Rockwell. She referenced her husband's role as SVP at Stratagem Realty Group. Confirm if Stratagem has any direct or indirect contracts with Aurora or its subsidiaries. Prioritize. M. She hit send. Julian would see it within minutes. His efficiency was one of the reasons she trusted him implicitly. She closed the app and looked out at the endless blue. Somewhere far ahead, London waited, but before she landed, she suspected there would be more movement on the ground than in the air. From behind her, a quiet voice spoke. "Dr. Ellison?" It was Ethan again, leaning forward just enough that Naomi, at the far end of the cabin, wouldn't notice. The video's already getting views. People are talking about how you stayed calm, about how she kept pushing. Mariah sipped her tea. Then I hope they talk about why she thought she could push. Ethan nodded, a flicker of admiration in his expression. They will. Mariah turned back to the window, letting the conversation end there. She wasn't doing this for a viral clip. She was doing it because she refused to let people like Vivian redefine the space she had built. Hours stretched ahead over the ocean, but the first cracks had already appeared in the Rockwell's confidence. Mariah knew from experience once those cracks started. They spread faster than anyone expected. The hours over the Atlantic had a way of stretching and folding in on themselves, moments of quiet punctuated by small movements. Passengers shifted in their seats. Flight attendants moved softly along the aisle, the constant hum of the engines creating a steady backdrop. Mariah had closed her eyes for a while, letting her mind drift between light sleep and waking thought. But even in rest, the earlier confrontation replayed in fragments, Vivian's voice sharp with entitlement, the disbelief in her eyes when the truth was spoken, the silence that followed. When she opened her eyes again, the cabin lights had been dimmed for rest. A few passengers were asleep under neatly folded duvets. Ethan was leaning against the window in 3A, headphones in, the faint glow of his phone screen reflecting on his glasses. Naomi appeared beside Mariah's suite with a small plate of fruit and a bottle of sparkling water. "Thought you might want something light," she said. Mariah smiled. "You read my mind." "Thank you." Naomi hesitated. "Dr. Ellison, may I ask you something?" Mariah set the plate down. "Of course. What you did earlier, calling the captain, standing your ground. I know you've probably dealt with situations like that before, but it's rare to see someone handle it without getting pulled into the emotion of it." Mariah looked at her thoughtfully. "It's not that I don't feel it. I do. Every word like that. It leaves a mark. But emotion is like wind at altitude. If you let it push you off course, you lose sight of where you're going. I'd rather keep my heading." Naomi's expression softened. "That's something I'll remember." She straightened. "We're expecting some mild turbulence ahead. Nothing serious." Mariah nodded. "Understood." As Naomi moved away, Mariah picked up a slice of melon and let the sweetness linger. Her mind shifted from the conversation to the message she'd sent Julian. She knew him well enough to trust he was already pulling threads, checking contract databases, tracing any connection between Stratagem Realty Group and Aurora's web of subsidiaries. The captain's voice came over the intercom, calm and steady. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're passing through an area of unstable air. Please return to your seats and fasten seat belts." The cabin responded with quiet compliance. Seatbelt signs lit up. Duvets were pulled closer. The aircraft rocked gently, a reminder of the power and unpredictability of the skies. Mariah glanced toward the empty seats where the Rockwells had sat. It struck her that power could be as invisible as turbulence. You didn't always see it, but you felt its effect, shifting your course without warning. She turned back to the window, watching the thin curve of the earth against the darkening sky. Somewhere far below, the Atlantic rolled in endless swells, untouched by the conflict that had played out hours earlier. A light tap at her armrest drew her attention. Ethan was leaning slightly forward, his voice low. "It's spreading," he said. Mariah's brow lifted. "The video." He nodded. "Views are doubling every hour. People are posting about it, not just the incident, but about you, about how you handled it." She considered this, and the comments mostly supportive. Ethan said, "Some people are asking who Vivian Rockwell is. A few are digging into her husband's company. The internet moves fast." Mariah gave a small smile. "Yes, it does. But speed without direction can burn out quickly. Stories flare and fade. This one might not." Ethan said, "It's not just a confrontation. It's a symbol." You know, Mariah didn't answer immediately. She knew the power of symbols, how they could inspire, but also how easily they could be co-opted, twisted, reduced to a meme that stripped away the real meaning. "Symbols are fine," she said finally. "Change is better." Ethan seemed to take that in, nodding slowly before leaning back into his seat. Dinner service began quietly after the turbulence passed. The scent of roasted chicken and thyme filled the air. Mariah opted for the vegetarian option, savoring the quiet efficiency of the crew. As she ate, her mind worked through the next steps. Vivian's arrogance wasn't an isolated flaw. It was a symptom of something larger. The fact that she'd felt entitled to speak that way in public, on record, said as much about her environment as it did about her personally. If Stratagem Realty Group was part of Aurora's network, that environment could be influenced. She thought back to her early days at Aurora, when she'd pushed for a comprehensive diversity and inclusion clause in all major contracts. Some partners had balked, calling it unnecessary. She'd insisted. Now, she was glad she had. Naomi returned to clear her plate. "Would you like dessert?" Mariah shook her head. "Just tea, please." When Naomi brought it, she lingered for a moment. "You know," she said quietly, "there's a lot of talk in the crew galley. About you. About what happened. People feel protected." Mariah met her gaze. "That matters to me, more than most things." Naomi smiled faintly and moved on. Hours passed in the dimmed cabin. Some passengers slept. Others watched movies on the large screens in their suites. Mariah read for a while, but her attention kept drifting. She closed the book and let her thoughts settle instead on the horizon. She thought of Vivian again, not with anger, but with a kind of clinical curiosity. What made someone cling so tightly to a hierarchy that served them, even when it was built on exclusion? Was it fear of losing status? A belief in scarcity, that someone else's presence meant less for them? Or was it simply habit, ingrained so deeply it had never been questioned? Mariah knew that if she asked Vivian, she'd never get a straight answer. People rarely admitted the roots of their prejudice. But understanding it mattered, because you couldn't dismantle what you didn't understand. The engine's steady drone was almost hypnotic now. She sipped her tea, the warmth grounding her in the present. Outside, the stars were beginning to appear, scattered across the thin atmosphere like diamonds on black velvet. She was still looking at them when her tablet vibrated softly on the console. A secure message from Julian. She tapped it open. Preliminary check complete. Stratagem Realty Group maintains a multi-year facilities logistics contract with Novalink Services, one of Aurora's wholly owned subsidiaries. Estimated annual value $72 million. Contract includes brand integrity and conduct clause. Mariah read the message twice. The connection was clear, the potential leverage substantial. She typed a short reply. Good. Pull full contract. Highlight all relevant clauses. We'll discuss on arrival. M. She set the tablet down, her mind already sketching the outline of a response. Vivian had thought her husband's position would insulate them. Instead, it had opened a door. Mariah leaned back, closed her eyes, and let the sound of the engines carry her forward. There were 8 hours left to London, but the real journey, the one that would matter, had just begun. The cabin was still dimmed when Mariah opened her eyes again. A quiet chime signaled the crew moving through with trays of warm towels. She accepted one from Naomi, pressing the heat into her hands before folding it neatly onto the side console. Her mind returned immediately to Julian's message. $72 million a year. A brand integrity clause. A direct connection between Stratagem Realty Group and her own company's operations. The leverage was not just significant, it was decisive. She thought about Vivian's face when she had been told to leave the aircraft, the outrage, the disbelief, and Charles, silent and pale, as if he had glimpsed a future he didn't want to admit was possible. That look had told her more than words ever could. Ethan stirred in 3A, stretching slightly before leaning forward. "Morning," he said softly. Mariah returned the greeting. "Morning. Long night? I couldn't really sleep," he admitted. "Been reading comments. The video's been picked up by a couple of big accounts. People are asking for your name." "That's not something I need to give them," Mariah said, sipping from the glass of water Naomi had just set down. "They'll find it anyway," Ethan replied. "But right now, most of the focus is on her. The way she spoke, the way she acted. People recognize it." Mariah nodded slowly. "Recognition is one thing. What they do with it is another." Breakfast service began with the faint scent of coffee and warm croissants filling the air. Mariah accepted a plate of fruit and yogurt, eating slowly, while her mind mapped out the conversation she would have with Julian. It would need to be precise, no overt threats, no language that could be construed as vindictive. The facts alone would be enough. She glanced at the moving map on her screen. They were just over the Irish Sea now. London, less than an hour away. She reached for her tablet and began drafting a brief for Julian, to refine. Subject Stratagem Contract. Preliminary Action. Julian. Upon my arrival. Prepare a formal notice to Stratagem CEO outlining breach of brand integrity clause via public conduct of senior executive and spouse. Attach verified incident report and relevant media coverage. No demands. Only position and intent to review relationship. Mem. She saved the draft and set the tablet aside. Naomi passed by, checking on passengers. "We'll begin descent in about 30 minutes, she told Mariah. "Crew will be securing the cabin soon." Mariah smiled. "Thank you, Naomi." As the crew prepared for landing, she looked out the window. The clouds broke apart to reveal the patchwork of English countryside green fields cut into neat squares. Rivers glinting in the sunlight. London sprawled beyond, a haze of rooftops and winding streets. The landing was smooth. As the aircraft taxied toward the gate at Heathrow, passengers gathered their belongings. Ethan caught Mariah's attention once more. "Dr. Ellison, whatever happens next, I'm glad I was on this flight. Glad I saw it." She studied him for a moment. "Then I hope you'll remember what you saw, all of it, not just the part that makes headlines." He nodded earnestly. When the doors opened, Mariah waited until most of the passengers had disembarked before standing. Naomi met her at the door. "Safe travels, Dr. Ellison, and thank you." Mariah inclined her head. "You'll be hearing from me soon." The cool air of the jet bridge greeted her. Within minutes, she was in the quiet efficiency of Heathrow's VIP arrivals area. Her driver waited with her name discreetly printed on a tablet. She slipped into the back seat of the car, the city unfolding outside the tinted windows as they pulled away. She used the drive to catch up on messages. Julian had sent another update. A full copy of the stratagem contract was now in hand, along with a dossier on Charles Rockwell's role. He oversaw commercial leasing for multiple flagship properties, several of which used Novalink's logistics services exclusively. The relationships were deeply interwoven. Julian's message ended with one line. "This is actionable." Mariah typed back, "Meet at the London office at 1400. Bring legal and compliance." By the time the car reached Aurora's glass-walled headquarters near the Thames, her mind was fully in executive mode. She walked through the lobby without breaking stride, security staff nodding as she passed. Upstairs, Julian was already waiting in the conference room with two senior members of the legal department. The contract lay open on the table, key sections highlighted. Julian gestured to one in particular. Clause 9.2, Brand Integrity and Conduct. It covers senior executives and their immediate family members in any public setting that could impact the company's reputation or that of its partners. It's airtight. Mariah scanned the language. It was indeed airtight. She had insisted on similar clauses in all high-value partnerships. "Good," she said. "We will not rush. Draft the letter for Stratagem CEO. It will state that we are aware of the incident, that it meets the conditions for review, and that we will be evaluating whether to continue the current agreement in light of it." The head of legal nodded. "We'll prepare it for your signature." Julian leaned forward. "Do you want to make this public?" Mariah considered. "Not yet. The public already has a version of the story. We control the part they don't see." She turned to the window. The river glinting beyond. "When you have power, you don't need to shout. You set the terms. Quietly." Julian's eyes held a glint of admiration. Understood. The meeting ended with clear assignments. Mariah stepped back into her office, its walls lined with framed photographs from Aurora's history and a few personal images: her parents on their porch in Georgia, her younger self at her first air show, the first Aurora aircraft painted in the company's new livery after the acquisition. She allowed herself a moment to look at those photographs. They were reminders of why she'd built what she had, and why she guarded it so fiercely. The confrontation on the plane wasn't an isolated insult. It was part of a larger battle over who gets to belong, who gets to define the boundaries of spaces like that first-class cabin. Her phone buzzed. A news alert. The video from the flight had made it to a major network's online platform. The headline read, "First-class passenger harasses black woman, then learns she owns the airline." Mariah exhaled slowly. The framing was sensational, as she'd expected, but beneath it, the comments were spreading the story far and wide. She wondered if Vivian had seen it yet. Her desk phone rang. Julian's voice came through. "One more thing. Stratagem's stock dropped 2 points this morning. Analysts are speculating it's connected to the video." Mariah didn't smile, but her voice was steady. "Then they understand cause and effect." She hung up, turning her gaze back to the river. The first blow had landed, quietly, decisively, and without a single raised voice. The rest would follow. Julian stood at the head of the conference table, the printed draft of the letter resting in front of him. Mariah read through it line by line, her eyes catching every word, weighing each sentence for balance. It was formal, measured, stripped of any emotion that could be interpreted as vendetta. The facts stood alone, and they were more than enough. To Jonathan Reed, Chief Executive Officer, Stratagem Realty Group, she read aloud. In light of the events aboard Aurora Air Flight 007 on the 14th of this month, involving Mr. Charles Rockwell, Senior Vice President of Commercial Leasing, and his spouse, we are compelled to review the continued viability of our partnership under the terms of Clause 9.2 of our agreement. This clause provides for termination should the conduct of an executive or immediate family member cause reputational harm to either party. Enclosed are the official incident report, video documentation, and corroborating witness statements. We will hold renewal discussions in abeyance, pending your organization's review and satisfactory resolution of this matter. Mariah set the page down. Tighten the close, she said. No suggestions of leniency. The tone should be factual to the last word. Julian nodded and made a note. The head of legal scribbled something on her copy. What do you expect their reaction to be? Julian asked. Mariah leaned back in her chair. Shock, first, then calculation. They will want to preserve the contract, but they will also want to protect Charles. That tension will show us how much this partnership means to them. She signed the final draft without hesitation. The letter would be sent by secure courier and encrypted email before the hour was out. After the meeting, Mariah walked the length of the executive floor to the smaller, private lounge adjoining her office. The view here faced the city London's sprawl of rooftops and spires under a pale sky. She poured herself a glass of still water and stood for a moment, thinking. Her phone buzzed on the side table. An unfamiliar number appeared on the screen, but she answered anyway. Dr. Ellison, this is Martin Hale from Stratagem's legal department. Mr. Reed has asked to speak with you directly. Mariah's voice was polite but firm. Mr. Hale, I appreciate the outreach, but until your organization has completed its internal review, I see no reason for a discussion. I understand, Hale said quickly, but Mr. Reed would like to tell Mr. Reed. I'm confident his expression will be more valuable when accompanied by an actionable plan, Mariah said, then ended the call. She had no interest in small talk disguised as diplomacy. The letter was the first move, and she intended to let it work on them without interference. Across the city, in Stratagem's glass and steel headquarters, that letter landed on Jonathan Reed's desk before lunch. His assistant, pale-faced, waited as he read it. The official tone, the precision of the supporting documents, and most damning of all, the unedited video clip left little room for denial. Jonathan pressed a button on his phone. Get Charles Rockwell in here, now. Charles arrived 10 minutes later, looking as though the week had aged him a year. Jonathan gestured at the letter on the desk. Tell me this isn't what it looks like, Jonathan said. Charles swallowed. It's exactly what it looks like. Jonathan's voice was flat. Do you realize what's at stake here? This contract underpins our operations in 7 flagship properties. Losing it would mean restructuring half the division. And this isn't some baseless rumor, it's documented. It's on video. Charles tried to find the words. Vivian. She has a way of... I don't care about Vivian's way. Jonathan cut in. I care about the fact that you let this happen, that you didn't stop it, that you let our company's name get dragged into it. Charles lowered his gaze. What do you want me to do? You're on administrative leave effective immediately, Jonathan said. And if we can't salvage this, you won't be coming back. Back at Aurora. Mariah was in her office with Julian, reviewing a separate report from their corporate communications team. The video had crossed 2 million views overnight. Major outlets had begun reaching out for comment, which they declined. Letting the public conversation run its course was part of the strategy. The less they said now, the more weight their eventual actions would carry. Julian's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. "Stratagem's PR head is calling me." "Don't answer," Mariah said. "Not yet." He set the phone down, and for a moment the only sound in the room was the low hum of the air system. "You know they'll try to offer money," Julian said. "They can offer whatever they want." Mariah replied, "The cost is not the point. The terms are—" Julian studied her expression. "You're thinking about using this to force reforms." Mariah nodded slowly. "If they want to keep the contract, they'll accept a compliance framework, third-party audits, annual reports on hiring and pay equity, mandatory training with measurable outcomes, and it will be public. This isn't about punishing them, it's about making sure their culture matches the one they pretend to have." Julian's mouth curved into a faint smile. "You're turning their problem into our leverage." "I'm turning their problem into their opportunity," Mariah corrected. "What they do with it will tell me if they're worth keeping." By late afternoon, Stratagem's response arrived in the form of a carefully worded letter from Jonathan Reed himself. It acknowledged the seriousness of the incident, promised a full internal review, and expressed a strong desire to maintain the partnership. Mariah read it once, then handed it to Julian. "They're playing for time, and we're going to give it to them." He asked. "Yes," she said, "but on our clock, not theirs." As the day wound down, Mariah left the office and stepped into the evening air. The city lights shimmered on the river, and the hum of London traffic rose from the streets below. She thought of the Rockwells of Vivian, probably railing at anyone who would listen, and of Charles, sitting in some quiet office, realizing how quickly the ground could vanish under his feet. This was the first real pressure point, and she knew how to hold it steady. Power wasn't just about what you could do in the moment. It was about shaping the conditions so that when the other side moved, they had only one direction left to go. The next move would be theirs. The morning in London broke with a thin veil of mist over the river, softening the edges of the skyline. Mariah arrived at the office earlier than usual, her coffee still steaming in one hand as she reviewed the overnight updates. Julian was already in her office, standing beside the large screen on the wall that displayed a news feed. "They went to the press," he said, without preamble. Mariah set her coffee down. "Stratagem." Julian nodded. "Statement went out at 6:00. Ma. They're calling it an unfortunate misunderstanding between passengers. They've emphasized their commitment to diversity and respect." But he tapped the remote, bringing up the full text. "They've omitted any acknowledgement of Charles by name." Mariah scanned the statement. It was the kind of crafted vagueness she had seen countless times in corporate crises designed to sound responsible without admitting liability. "They're trying to blur the picture," she said quietly. Julian's expression was tight. "And it's working for some people. The comments are split. Half believe the video shows enough. Half say it's out of context." Mariah turned toward the window. The city below was coming to life, buses rolling across bridges, pedestrians hurrying in coats against the chill. She knew this was the point where many would back down, let the heat dissipate. But she also knew that real change didn't come from silence at the first sign of pushback. "Has the compliance framework draft been finalized?" she asked. "Yes," Julian said. "Our legal team finished it last night. It's firm, but implementable. Annual equity audits, executive training with outside oversight, transparent reporting on leadership demographics. It's more than they've ever had to do." Mariah picked up the folder he handed her, reading through the key points. "We'll present this as a condition for contract renewal," she said. "Not as a penalty, but as a natural evolution of our partnership." Julian gave a short laugh. "And if they refuse," Mariah looked at him steadily, "then they walk away. And so do we. And we make sure everyone knows why." She spent the next hour in back-to-back calls with her legal and communications teams. The instructions were clear: no reactive press statements, no interviews. They would speak once, and only once, when they had something definitive to announce. Until then, they would operate in the quiet space where decisions were made. At mid-morning, her assistant buzzed her. "Mr. Reed from Stratagem is on line 2. He says it's urgent." Mariah pressed the button. "Jonathan, Dr. Ellison." His voice came through smooth but tense. "I think we can both agree that this situation has escalated beyond where either of us would like it to be." "That depends on where you think it should be," Mariah replied evenly. "I believe we can resolve this without unnecessary damage to either of our companies," Jonathan said. "If we can sit down, face to face, I'm confident we can come to an understanding." "I'm sure we can," Mariah said, "which is why you'll be receiving a formal proposal from my office within the hour. It will outline the framework required to maintain our agreement. I suggest you review it carefully before we meet." There was a pause on the line. "And if we find the framework too restrictive?" Jonathan asked. "Then you'll be free to decline it," Mariah said, her voice calm, "and we'll be free to explore other arrangements." When she hung up, Julian was watching her from the doorway. "He'll read it," he said. "He'll read it twice." Mariah replied. By early afternoon, the proposal was in Jonathan's hands. Across the river, he sat in his office with his senior counsel and head of human resources, reading through the document with growing discomfort. "This is aggressive," his counsel said. "It goes well beyond the scope of the current contract." "It's aggressive because they have us pinned," Jonathan muttered. "If we refuse, the contract ends, and our competitors move in. If we accept, we overhaul our executive culture under their terms. Can we negotiate?" HR asked. Jonathan stared at the clauses. "We can try, but I think she knows exactly what she's doing, and she's holding all the leverage." Meanwhile, Mariah left the office for a luncheon. She had been invited 2 weeks earlier, a gathering of senior women leaders in London's business community. She arrived to find the private dining room abuzz with conversation, clinking glasses, and the scent of rosemary lamb wafting from the kitchen. Several attendees approached her almost immediately, having recognized her from the now viral video. "You were incredible on that flight." One said, "The way you stayed composed, I don't know if I could have managed it." Mariah smiled politely. "Composure is easier when you know where the real conversation will happen." As she sat down, she felt her phone vibrate. "A message from Julian Reed wants to meet tomorrow. He's bringing his legal team." She typed back, "Schedule it, our office." The rest of the luncheon passed in a blur of polite conversation, but her mind was already on the next day. She imagined Jonathan Reed across the table, weighing each word, calculating his company's survival against the discomfort of change. That evening, back in her flat overlooking the Thames, Mariah allowed herself a rare moment of quiet. She brewed chamomile tea and stood by the window, watching the lights of the city ripple on the water. She thought about her parents again, about the long road from their modest home in Georgia to this high-rise in London. They had taught her 2 things that she carried into every boardroom: never confuse noise for power, and never spend more energy on anger than on action. Tomorrow, she would need both lessons. She set her teacup down and opened her laptop, pulling up the proposal one last time. Each clause was a turning point, not just for stratagem, but for every partner who might think an incident like the one on the plane could pass without consequence. In the quiet of her apartment, the hum of the city fading into the distance, she could already see the headlines if they agreed. Aurora Air and Stratagem Realty announced joint equity initiative. It would read like collaboration, but she would know the truth. It had been forged in conflict, shaped by the refusal to yield, and anchored by the simple fact that some lines could not be crossed without cost. Morning light washed the boardroom in a pale gold that softened the edges of glass and steel. Mariah stood at the window for a moment and let the river's slow current steady her breath. She felt the familiar quiet gather inside her, the kind she relied on before major decisions. In the glass, she could see the reflection of Julian arranging folders at the table. He did not speak. He knew her prelude to every negotiation was silence. The receptionist buzzed. Stratagem had arrived. Jonathan Reed entered with two people, Martin Hale from Legal, Priya Desai from Human Resources. All three wore the look of executives who had not slept well. They shook hands, polite, controlled. Julian poured water. No small talk. Mariah motioned to the chairs. "Thank you for coming in person." Jonathan nodded and sat. "We appreciate the opportunity to address this directly." Mariah did not return the courtesy with a smile. She opened a folder and slid a single sheet across the table. "This is the framework required to maintain our partnership. There is nothing punitive in it. It is a set of standards we already hold ourselves to. If Stratagem agrees, we proceed. If you do not, we part ways with clarity." Martin reached for the paper. His eyes moved fast. Annual equity audits by an independent firm approved by Aurora. Transparent reporting on leadership demographics and pay equity. Documented executive training with measurable outcomes. A conduct escalation pathway tied to contract status. Priya's pen tapped once at each clause, then stilled. Jonathan cleared his throat. "We have reviewed this in outline. It is extensive." Mariah folded her hands. "It is necessary." Jonathan tried a different angle. "We respect your values, Dr. Ellison. But there is also the specific matter. Charles is on leave. We will conduct a thorough internal review. We will respond publicly once that review is complete." Mariah met his gaze. "Your review is yours to conduct. Our decision on renewal is ours to make. The two are related, but not dependent. The framework is not a press release. It is a system." Martin leaned forward slightly. "If Stratagem were to make a significant donation to an equity initiative of your choosing, would that demonstrate good faith while we refine the framework together?" Mariah did not blink. "Money is not a substitute for change. A donation is the sound of coins in a bowl. This is about architecture. We are talking about how the building holds in a storm." Priya exhaled. Her voice was lower when she spoke. "Our culture work has lagged. I will not pretend otherwise. If we accept this framework, will Aurora expect removals at the executive level as an immediate condition?" Mariah let the question live in the room for a moment. "I am not here to decide who sits in your chairs. I am here to decide whether our name shares a page with yours. That decision rests on verifiable outcomes and a credible plan. If your plan requires personnel changes, that is your call. Our condition is results over time, with sunlight." Julian slid another document across to Jonathan. He did not speak. The letterhead did it for him. Attached was the official incident report from Flight 407. A timeline. Statements from crew and passengers. The captain's notation under safety and compliance. There was no embellishment, only facts that held their own weight. Jonathan studied the report. When he spoke again, the theater in his tone had drained away. What are your timelines? First public summary of commitments within 30 days. First independent audit within 9 months. Annual reports for 5 years. Probationary renewal for the length of the audits. Non-compliance triggers review and possible termination. All terms reciprocal. If Aurora fails our own standards, you may invoke the same review. The reciprocity landed. Priya looked up with something like respect. That is fair. The door opened quietly. Mariah's assistant stepped in with a note and an apology. A live press van had parked outside Stratagem. Calls were coming in fast. Jonathan did not hide his wince. He had hoped for a slower clock. Before anyone could speak, the intercom buzzed again, a call for the Aurora board secretary. She answered in the adjacent room. Her voice was a low murmur behind the glass. The morning was tilting toward afternoon, and the city outside moved without caring who said what in this room. Mariah shifted the conversation from terms to truth. I want to be clear about something fundamental. This began on an airplane, in a cabin that was designed to make people feel safe and seen. A passenger chose to make it a stage for hierarchy and harm. I will not let that space stand as a theater for anyone's smallness. My responsibility is to the people who fly with us and work with us. That responsibility does not end when the plane lands. It extends to the companies we bring into our orbit. If you choose to continue with us, you are choosing that standard. Not my ego. Not my opinion. A standard. For a long beat, no one spoke. The building's air system whispered. Traffic far below hummed like a distant river. Jonathan closed his eyes for a second, as if weighing 2 doors in his head. When he opened them, his voice was quieter. I understand. I do. I do not know if my board does yet, but I do. Mariah nodded once. Then this will be simple. Take the framework. Present it to your board as the cost of keeping a contract that stabilizes a significant part of your portfolio. Frame it as risk management if you must. I am not looking for a confession. I am looking for a spine. Martin cleared his throat. We will need to request one modification. He glanced at Priya. The veto over the audit firm? Could we propose a short list instead? 3 independent firms. Aurora chooses one. Julian looked to Mariah. She considered, then gave a small nod. 3 is acceptable if all 3 meet our criteria and none have a current conflict with Stratagem. Noted, Martin said. Jonathan closed his folder with care, as if shutting a door softly. I will bring this to the board. I will call you this evening. There is one more thing, Mariah said. He paused. When you communicate with your team and the public, do not call what happened a misunderstanding. Words matter. It was a pattern expressed in a moment. Name it as such. Not because I need an apology, because your people need honesty. Priya spoke before Jonathan could. We can do that. The meeting ended without handshakes this time. Not from coldness, from focus. Stratagem left with papers under arms and phones already up to ears. The room was quiet again. Julian blew out a breath he had been holding. That was a line you walked. Mariah sat back and let the ceiling draw her gaze for a second. I do not need them to like me. I need them to learn. Her phone buzzed. A message from Naomi. Crew recognition list for the month had posted. She wanted to nominate 2 attendants who had helped steady the cabin after the removal. Mariah smiled at the screen and typed a reply that would begin the paperwork for merit bonuses. Culture is not a memo. It is 1,000 small reinforcements that say we meant what we said. Another buzz. A text from Ethan. The longer video is up. Full context. People are seeing the part where you warned her and gave her an off-ramp. Comments say they heard your voice and felt the room settle. She wrote back, "Thank you for choosing to show the whole story." He responded with a simple promise, "I will keep doing that." Afternoon bled into evening. The river turned from silver to slate. Streetlights clicked on in a line along the embankment like a string of low stars. Mariah stood once more at the window, hands resting lightly in her pockets, and felt the familiar ache rise and ease. She let herself look at it without turning away. Not victory. Not yet. A step. Enough to make the next one possible. Her desk phone rang. Julian answered from the doorway and held the handset toward her with a look that said, "This is the call." Mariah took it. Jonathan's voice came through with no preamble this time. "We accept the framework with the audit firm modification. The board vote was 6-3. We will issue a statement in the morning that acknowledges the incident as misconduct. We will note the probationary renewal and the joint initiative. Charles has resigned." Mariah closed her eyes for a heartbeat. Not gloating, not relief. The feeling of a mechanism clicking into place. "Thank you," she said. "We will countersign and schedule the first audit. Send your proposed list by noon." There was a pause on the line. "Dr. Ellison," Jonathan said softly, "this will change us. It will be hard, but it will change us. It will, if you let it," she said. Then the call ended. The office was almost dark now. The city threw enough light through the glass to paint her desk in a faint glow. She sent 2 messages. One to legal to begin the onboarding of the framework. One to communications to draft a joint statement with precise language and no triumph. In the quiet that followed, she breathed. She let the rhythm slow. She thought of the cabin at 36,000 feet, the scent of chamomile, the steady hum, the moment she chose action over anger, the line she drew and refused to step back from. She whispered to the empty room what she would never post online. Let the spaces we build stay worthy of the people in them. The joint statement went live at sunrise. It was lean and clear. Aurora Air and Stratagem Realty would continue their partnership under a 5-year compliance framework. There would be independent audits. There would be public reporting. There would be training with measurable outcomes. The statement named the cabin incident as misconduct. It did not dress it up as a misunderstanding. Mariah read it once on her phone, then closed the screen and looked out at the morning sky. A light rain was moving across London, painting silver streaks on the office windows. She had an afternoon flight to New York to chair a board session and to visit an operations center in Queens. She wanted her next move to happen where she felt most at home, in the air. At Heathrow, the Aurora Lounge felt different than the last time she had passed this way. The staff greeted her with a small extra warmth that had nothing to do with protocol. She could feel the quiet energy of people who had seen the news and had decided to take it personally. She answered it with the same steadiness as always. A simple good morning. A sincere thank you. On board the wide body. The first-class cabin was a soft landscape of oak and light. 12 suites, each its own island. A new crew today. The lead attendant introduced herself. Alina Moretti, Italy by way of Manchester. Bright eyes and a calm voice. Welcome aboard, Dr. Ellison. Your seat is 1A. May I bring you green tea? Please, Mariah said, and thank you. As Mariah settled into 1A, she felt the familiar click of the belt and the small release that came with it. Time in the air obeyed a different logic. Minutes stretched when you needed them to. Hours passed in a gentle rush. The engines became a river that carried you from one life to the next. Across the aisle, a middle-aged man in 1D glanced over his newspaper. His mouth curved into a small, respectful nod. He did not speak. He did not need to. A woman in 2A cupped her hand around her phone, then set it face down as if catching herself in a habit she did not want to indulge. People had seen the clip. They were still seeing it. Mariah chose presence over performance. She adjusted the small lamp at her console and opened her notebook. Alina returned with the tea and a gentle word. "We are proud to have you with us today." Mariah met her eyes. "I am proud of you. Pass that to your team." As the doors closed, the captain gave his welcome. Weather over the Atlantic would be smooth. Tailwinds were favorable. The cabin lights softened. The aircraft pushed back, and the runway unfurled like a promise. During the climb, Alina passed with menus. Today, the chef suggested a roasted cauliflower with lemon and herbs. Mariah chose it and requested a small salad. She ate slowly, feeling the way simple flavors could anchor an entire body. The steady hum of the engines threaded through her chest and eased a knot she had not known she carried. 40 minutes after takeoff, her phone buzzed with a secure message. It was Julian. The framework had been signed by both sides. Stratagem had released a second internal memo to staff. This one used the word misconduct without apology. It set out a timeline for the first audit. It named Priya Desai as the executive sponsor for culture reform. It noted that Charles had resigned to pursue other opportunities. Julian added that media coverage was shifting. The theme was moving from outrage to structure, from shock to consequence. Mariah typed a short reply. "Good. Move forward on crew recognition. Naomi first. List the others who helped stabilize the cabin. Prepare letters and bonuses. Also, reach out to Ethan. Offer him a paid summer internship in corporate communications. If he accepts, pair him with a mentor who values context, not spectacle." She put the phone away and looked out at the pale blue spread across the windows. The Atlantic below was the same Atlantic as always, untroubled by the drama of people. She let the idea settle her breath. Then she allowed a different thought to rise. Victory was a noisy word. She did not want it. What she wanted was accuracy. What she wanted was a path that would still make sense when the trending tags were gone. 2 hours into the flight, Alina returned with coffee for another passenger and paused at Mariah's suite. "May I share something?" "Of course. I joined Aurora the year you took over," Alina said. "My first month. A senior passenger called me a word I will not repeat. My supervisor apologized to him for the delay in service. I went home that night and decided to find a different career. 2 weeks later, we received new training. The language had changed. The policy had changed. The expectation had changed. I stayed. I am still here because the standard moved." Mariah listened without interrupting. "Thank you for telling me," she said, "and I am sorry for what you endured. The standard will not move backward while I am here." Alina gave a small, grateful nod. She moved on, and Mariah returned to her notebook. She wrote a line her father had said when she was young, when a teacher had doubted her place in an advanced class. "Do not raise your voice. Raise your aim." She underlined it once. She let it sit on the page like a promise. The cabin eased into the long rhythm of transatlantic flight. A few passengers slept. A few watched films. One sketched with a pencil on thick paper, head tilted in a private world. Mariah scrolled through the notes for her meeting in New York. Fuel efficiency protocols, a new maintenance schedule, A proposal for a scholarship fund for aviation students from communities that rarely saw a cockpit up close. Her phone buzzed again. A text from Naomi. Crew recognition forms submitted. She added a personal note. I still hear your voice that day. It filled the room without getting loud. Thank you for keeping us steady. Mariah smiled at the screen and typed back. Thank you for standing in the gap. See you on your next layover in New York. Tea on me. Lunch arrived. The roasted cauliflower was bright with lemon. The salad was crisp. Mariah let each bite slow her thinking. Then another message arrived. This one from her mother. Short and perfect. I watched the video. Your grandmother would have laughed at the moment with the captain. Then she would have told you to get some rest. I love you. Mariah felt a warmth that no cabin air could supply. She typed back. I love you. Landing in a few hours. We'll call after the board session. Later, with the cabin lights lowered. She closed her eyes but did not sleep. She let her mind return to the aisle on that first flight, the line where patience ended and decision began. She did not second-guess it. She did not replay it to change details. She simply observed it with the calm of someone who had moved through anger to action and had no interest in going back. When she opened her eyes again, the map on her screen showed the aircraft approaching Newfoundland. The captain announced a minor route adjustment for weather. The cabin shifted almost imperceptibly. The engines modulated and then steadied. Mariah noticed the small hands of control that kept 100 tons of metal obedient to air. Ethan texted a link to a longer cut of his video. It included the quiet moments before the confrontation, the brief exchange with Naomi, the way Mariah had asked Vivian to stop only once. It gave the scene its full shape. The comments were different under this cut. More measured, more aware of sequence and tone. Good work, she wrote. Thank you, he replied. If the internship is real, I am in. It is real, she wrote. Welcome aboard. The hours slid by, and the clouds opened over the coast. The light shifted to late afternoon. The aircraft began its descent toward New York. The skyline etched itself against the sky, all edges and shine. The river below braided steel bridges and brown water. As the wheels touched down, Mariah felt that small sinking lift in her stomach and the soft applause from a seat behind her. The cabin breathed as one as the engines idled and the aircraft taxied toward the gate. At the door, Alina stood with 2 crew members. Thank you for flying with us, Dr. Ellison. Thank you for the grace you carry in this cabin, Mariah said. She meant every word. In the jet bridge, the air smelled faintly of jet fuel and cold metal. It felt familiar. It felt like purpose. In the terminal, a few travelers glanced at her and then away, recognizing the face from their screens. Mariah did not slow. Her driver met her at a side door, and she was in the car before her phone buzzed again. Julian. The stock markets had closed higher for Aurora. Stratagem had stabilized by the bell. Analysts were calling the framework a model for partner governance. A news anchor had ended a segment with a line that made Julian smile. True power does not shout. It sets terms. Mariah did not smile. She was glad to hear it, but her mind was already on the operations center, on the technicians who would never trend, on the planners who timed 100 moving parts to the minute, on the crew who turned a machine into a place where people could breathe. The car rolled onto the expressway. The sky was a pale blue that promised a cold night. Mariah rested her head against the seat for a moment and let herself feel everything at once. The exhaustion, the steadiness, the ache that comes after you hold a line. She let it fill her chest, and then she let it pass. Ahead, the next door was already opening. The board session in New York ended at dusk. Numbers, charts, engine time, fuel curves, the work that keeps an airline in the sky. Mariah left the conference room feeling both steady and tired, the fullness that comes when responsibility has done its rounds. She could have gone home. Instead, she asked her driver to take her back to the airport. There was a late flight to Atlanta where Aurora kept a training center for new cabin crews. She wanted to be with her people. She wanted the hum of an aircraft under her feet. At the terminal, the air smelled of coffee and jet fuel, a mix that always made her feel awake in a clean way. The gate agents greeted her with the composed warmth she had taught them to offer everyone. Alina Moretti was at the door again, this time working a different route as a reserve lead. She brightened when she saw Mariah. "Back with us already." "Dr. Ellison." Mariah smiled. "I am following the current. Seat 2A is fine." Alina laughed softly. The ocean of the sky. Boarding moved at its usual careful pace. Business travelers. A young couple with matching backpacks. A mother with a toddler who held a stuffed bear by one ear. The last group filtered down the jet bridge and then paused. A black woman in her late 30s stood at the door of the cabin, ticket in hand, eyes scanning the numbers. Her shoulders carried a familiar tension. She was in economy. She looked like she had told herself to be small all day. Alina reached for her scan and then glanced back at Mariah. Just for a second, not asking for intervention, only making sure the door felt like a welcome. Mariah watched the woman find her place in row 22. She made a note in her head that the next block of crew training needed a section on noticing the quiet weight people carry, the kind you can lift without anyone asking you to. The door closed. The cabin lights softened. A new captain spoke from the flight deck, a voice as steady as a metronome. "Smooth air tonight. 2 hours and change to Atlanta." The climb pressed everyone gently into their seats and then released. The city fell away. Darkness gathered the sky in a wide bowl. Mariah opened her notebook. She wrote a sentence at the top of a fresh page. The standard must be portable. She drew a square around it. She thought of the framework with stratagem and saw how it could move. She had always required conduct clauses in large contracts. Now she saw something more useful. Not clauses that merely punished. Clauses that built. A series of small structures that made dignity the path of least resistance. Her phone buzzed once. A message from Julian. The joint statement had landed well. Analysts were calling the agreement a template. 2 partners had reached out asking for language they could adopt. Julian asked a question at the end. "Do you want to formalize the Aurora standard and offer it to our network?" Mariah looked at the sentence in her notebook. She typed a reply. "Yes. Write a draft. Make it clear. Make it simple. 1 page. 5 commitments. Audits. Pay equity transparency. Reporting on leadership. Conduct escalation tied to contracts. Training measured by outcomes. Reciprocity language included. No slogans. Only verbs." She put the phone face down and breathed. The engines hummed like distant surf. Alina passed with water and a soft check-in. "Anything you need." "Dr. Ellison, I am good. Thank you." "How is the team tonight?" "Solid," Alina said. "We had a small moment in premium economy earlier. A passenger insisted a young man had taken her overhead space because he did not look like he belonged in that cabin. Training held. We handled it. No scene. But the words still hang in the air after the person who said them sits down." "They do," Mariah said. "Thank you for setting the tone." Alina moved on with quiet steps. Mariah looked toward row 22 again. The woman with the bear-clutching toddler had fallen asleep in that half-upright way parents learn on airplanes. The toddler's head was on her shoulder. The bear looked at the ceiling with a patient expression. Mariah pressed the call button. Alina returned. "Yes, can we move them to 2 open seats in premium economy?" Mariah asked. "Side by side. Give them rest." Alina did not ask why. "Of course," she said. She went to the galley, spoke with a colleague, then knelt by the woman and whispered a quiet question. The woman's eyes filled on reflex. She nodded, grateful and embarrassed in the same breath. The move took less than a minute. The toddler did not wake. The bear changed cabins without complaint. Mariah watched without claiming credit. Small reinforcements. The way a culture grows teeth and gentleness at once. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a name she did not expect. An email from Vivian Rockwell. The subject line was a single word: apology. Mariah hesitated and then opened it. Vivian had written 4 paragraphs. The sentences sawed between defensiveness and contrition. There were reasons offered without fully offering them. She had been under stress. She had misread a situation. She had not known who Mariah was. The last line tried to be plain. "I am sorry for the things I said. I am sorry for the way I behaved." Mariah leaned back. She felt the old and the new argue under the surface. The old wanted a clean burn. The new, the part she had worked to build, asked a quieter question. What response teaches the most? She wrote a reply with the same restraint she used in a cockpit storm. "Mrs. Rockwell, I acknowledge your message. My name is not the point. The point is that no one on that plane needed to be someone for you to treat them with respect. I do not need your apology for myself, but I hope you will give a different apology to the next person you are tempted to belittle. Say it with your actions. You have influence. Use it to make the space you are in safer than you found it. Dr. Mariah Ellison." She sent it and felt a small click inside. Not satisfaction. Alignment. The captain announced they had reached cruise at 37,000 feet. The cabin settled. Lights dimmed 1 notch. A woman in 3A opened a novel and smiled at a sentence. The private joy of a reader. A man in 4D closed his eyes and breathed with intention, counting time in and out. Mariah opened her notebook again. She wrote in short lines the way she did when thinking for the ear rather than the eye. The standard must be portable. Put it in contracts. Put it in training. Put it in recognition. Pay the people who hold the line. Protect the ones who name the problem. Do not confuse damage control with culture. Choose verbs. She thought of Ethan. She pictured him at a desk inside Aurora's communications floor with a mentor who insisted on context over heat. She smiled and made a note to have HR call him in the morning to begin the paperwork. The internship would not be a token. It would be work. It would be a start. Her phone buzzed once more. Julian, again. "One more thing. Naomi's promotion packet is ready. Cabin supervisor effective next cycle. Compensation increase approved. Do you want to add a personal note?" Mariah typed back. "Yes. Draft this. Naomi, you are grace under pressure and clarity under noise. That is leadership. We see you. We expect your light to multiply." She set the phone down and let her eyes close for a moment. The engines sang their steady song. In the edges of half-sleep, she saw the aisle again. Vivian's face tight with disbelief. Captain Kane's quiet authority. Naomi's hand steady on the service cart. The point where saying nothing would have become agreement. The hinge where the story turned because she chose to turn it. The seatbelt sign chimed on as they began descent. Atlanta spread in lights below, like a spilled box of gold pins. The tires kissed the runway, and the cabin breathed out as one. As they taxied, Alina came by one more time. "We will be at the gate shortly. Dr. Ellison, do you want an escort to the training center?" "I will walk," Mariah said. "I want to feel the floor." At the door, Alina stood with the rest of the crew. "Thank you for flying with us again. Thank you for the 1,000 small things," Mariah said. "They are what make the big things possible." The jet bridge was cool and metallic. The terminal smelled of pretzels and coffee and the trace of disinfectant. Mariah walked at an unhurried pace, an island of quiet in a river of movement. A maintenance worker glanced up and nodded. A gate agent fixed a sign with a strip of tape and stepped back to make sure it hung straight. Small stays, small bearings, the invisible work of keeping a system aligned. In the elevator to the training floor, Mariah looked at her reflection, not at the suit or the earrings or the smoothness of a face under office lights. She looked for the thing she had promised herself to protect when she was younger and angrier. The part that preferred building to burning. The part that could take a hit without passing it forward. At the training center door, she paused, hand on the handle. She could hear voices inside. Laughter. A question about service flow in a full cabin. A correction given without sharpness. She smiled. The standard was already in the room. Mariah stood just inside the doorway of the training center and listened. Voices. Laughter. A question about service flow in a full cabin. The room smelled faintly of coffee and new fabric. On the far wall, a mock aisle ran between 2 rows of practice seats. A young instructor guided a scenario with a calm hand. She let the door swing shut behind her and stepped in. "Good evening," she said. Heads turned. A few smiles widened in surprise. The instructor straightened without losing the thread of the lesson. "Carry on," Mariah said. "I'm here to watch." The scenario continued. A passenger insisted the overhead bin above her seat was her personal space. Another passenger had used it. The instructor paused the scene and asked the class for options. Hands went up. A trainee suggested a simple reset. A second proposed a script that affirmed both people while making the shared rules clear. A third added a line about tone. The words matter. So does the way they land. Mariah watched the scene replay with the new language. It worked. The tension dropped. The aisle felt like air again. She nodded once. Good. The class broke for a short break. The instructor approached her with an open expression. "Thank you for letting me keep going," she said. "Thank you for what you are building," Mariah replied. They spoke for a few minutes about small adjustments that lead to large effects. Word choice, posture, when to pause, when to escalate. Then Mariah excused herself and walked the corridor lined with photographs of crews from every decade of the airline. Smiling faces, crisp uniforms, hands on shoulders. A history of people making a metal tube feel like a place. Her phone buzzed. "Julian, update," he said when she answered. "The first audit firm list from Stratagem arrived. All 3 pass our criteria. Priya sent a note. She asked for a meeting to talk through internal milestones. Also, Naomi signed her promotion packet. She will send a thank you note, but asked me to tell you something first. She said it feels like the floor is more solid under her feet." "It should," Mariah said. "Make sure her team knows why she moved up. Name the behaviors. Make them contagious." "Done," Julian said. "One more. Ethan accepted the internship officially. He starts next month. Pair him with someone who does not love noise." Mariah said. Then she added, "Tell him to bring a notebook. The real work will not fit on a single screen." She ended the call and looked down the hall toward a small door marked Cabin Simulator. Inside, A narrow mock fuselage sat on hydraulic legs. Crews ran drills here. Fire, decompression, de-escalation. She climbed the steps and stood in the aisle while a trainer toggled the lights through day and night. She placed her palm on the side panel and felt the faint vibration of the machine. Then she saw it, a detail that had come from a conversation years ago. A small placard above the galley. It read, in clean letters, "Everyone on this flight is a guest. Everyone on this crew is a guardian. Treat each other accordingly." She smiled. Culture in one sentence. A reminder that could fit anywhere. An hour later, she left the building and walked into the warm Georgia night. The air smelled of pine and jet fuel. A shuttle took her back to the terminal. A red-eye to Los Angeles was boarding, and she decided to take it. Home could wait one more day. At the gate, she stood aside while families and night-shift travelers moved forward. She watched a teenager hold his mother's hand and then act like he was not holding it. She watched a man in a suit close his eyes and breathe as if letting the day loosen its grip. She watched a woman with a service dog check the harness with a practiced touch. On board, the cabin lights were set low. The first-class suite in 2A felt familiar the moment she set down her bag. A young lead attendant introduced himself. Marco Ibarra, confident but gentle. "Welcome, Dr. Ellison," he said. "May I bring you your tea?" "Please," she said. As the aircraft pushed back, she wrote a short message to her mother. "In the air again. Call you from the other side. I love you." The message sent. The engines rose. The runway became a streak of light and then a field of dark. The plane climbed and the city fell away. When the seatbelt sign went off, a man in 1D stood to adjust his jacket in the wardrobe. He glanced over and then nodded once. "You are the one from the video," he said softly. "My daughter sent it to me. I told her I wished I had seen that kind of steadiness when I was learning how to move in rooms that did not expect me." "Thank you." Mariah returned the nod. "We all learn from someone." He sat. The exchange was nothing and everything, a thread between strangers at 35,000 feet. Marco returned with the tea. He lingered for a second. "I started here on night flights," he said. "The first year was hard. I made mistakes. I learned to breathe. I learned to let silence do some of the work. Seeing how you handled that day made me think about how we teach that to new crew. Not just service steps, the weight of a room, the way to shift it without force." "Teach that," Mariah said. "Write it down. Turn it into a drill. Practice until it lives in your hands." He smiled. "Yes, ma'am." The cabin settled into a soft rhythm. Mariah opened her notebook and wrote a letter she had waited to write until the noise had faded. It was to the crew of Flight 007. She thanked them for their professionalism and their calm. She named specific actions she had seen. Naomi's steady voice, the captain's clarity. The cart positioned just so to help the aisle remain clear. She wrote that leadership was not a title. It was a set of choices anyone could make. She closed the notebook and looked out at the night. Stars spooled past the window in a slow parade. The wing lights blinked at an even pace, a metronome for the sky. Her mind went back to the first moments in the lounge in Los Angeles. The click of heels, the voice that arrived several notches too loud for the room, the glance that tried to measure her and write her down to size. She let the memory pass through without clinging to it. Then she returned to the present. A cabin at peace, a crew that knew its work, a system that had adjusted to a standard and would hold it. She did not think of victory. She thought of stewardship. The captain's voice came on, low and steady. Smooth air ahead, Arrival on schedule. He signed off with a tone that said, "I have you." Mariah closed her eyes and let the thought land. Somewhere a person would board for the first time tomorrow. Someone who had been told to be small. Someone who had been told to be loud. Someone who had decided to be neither. They would sit. They would breathe. And if a moment came when they were measured by the wrong scale, the crew would know what to do. The room would shift. The line would hold. The plane crossed the desert. The night began to thin. The first gray of dawn touched the wing. She opened her notebook one last time and wrote a few lines for herself. True power is not a storm. It is a seam. It is the place where things hold together when the wind rises. Do not raise your voice. Raise your aim. Set the terms, then keep them. The wheels touched down in Los Angeles with a soft sigh. The cabin breathed out. Marco stood at the door with the rest of the crew. "Thank you for flying with us." "Dr. Ellison, thank you for keeping the room," she said. In the lounge, she found a quiet chair and a view of the runway. She watched ground crews move like a dance they had practiced for years. She finished her tea. She sent 3 messages, one to Julian to confirm the audit timeline, one to Naomi to say congratulations again, one to Ethan to assign his first project, a narrative guide for telling hard stories with context and care. Then she stood and walked toward the day. She did not look for anyone to notice. She did not look for anyone to applaud. She simply chose the next right thing. The Standard would travel with her, into every cabin, into every contract, into every room where someone tried to decide who belonged. Be careful who you look down on, she thought. They might be the one holding the wings you are flying on. You just watched a cabin turn into a test of character. A woman refused to shrink. A crew chose courage. A company chose standards over noise. This is what power can be when it remembers its purpose. It protects. It builds. It lifts. Prejudice tried to write the script. Dignity took the pen. If this story stirred something in you, let it become action. Speak up in small moments. Reward grace when you see it. Refuse to let cruelty feel normal. Every seat, every aisle, every room we share should be safe to breathe in. No one earns respect. They receive it because they are human. Carry this feeling with you after the screen goes dark. Hold the people who show quiet strength a little closer. Call out the behavior that harms, even when it hides behind a smile. And come back for more stories that honor love, demand justice, and set a higher bar for all of us. If this moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps this message fly farther. See you in the next flight.